Introduction. My topic today is based on a paper that I did last summer at a roundtable at Oxford College that's published in their their journal of policy, public policy, I forget exactly what they call it. Those of you who are familiar with the British educational system know that the universities like Oxford are private, and each of the colleges is independent. So they have to raise their own money. One good way of raising money in the summer when the dorms are empty, they have these roundtables when visitors, usually Americans, spend 5 days there staying in the dorms, eating in their dining halls, putting out a lot of money. These are one of the benefits that distinguished professors get is that Wayne University presidents have put amounts of money into the research accounts that they can use for events such as this, so they're not spending otherwise scarce travel dollars. But these dorms should not be confused with typical college dorms. They are very comfortable. When I went for the first time in 2006, my wife said, well, you're going to have to be sharing bathrooms, so you can't take as much time as you usually do. But actually, the rooms all had private baths, and in fact, there was a double room. My wife joined me for a couple of nights last summer. The topic was called Religion and Politics, Middle East Peace or the Bomb. It was trying to relate Middle East peace to Iran getting the nuclear weapons and other issues. I presented this paper that put together certain themes that I had done before. And one is the importance of religion in American life. I think academics sometimes don't appreciate that. I think academics tend to be liberal or secular in their views, and they don't fully appreciate how important religion is to substantial numbers of people. And then I talk about the fact that we have a First Amendment that guarantees freedom of speech and guarantees religious freedom, and that religious people, religious organizations should try to influence public policy to conform with views of their religion. We've seen this just recently when the Department of Health and Human Services issued a regulation requiring Catholic-affiliated hospitals, universities, and social service agencies to cover contraception in their insurance policies. The Catholic bishops strongly objected to it, and the administration pulled back a bit, changing the rule so that the policies, I guess the employers themselves would no longer have to pay for covering this, but the insurance companies would. The Catholic bishops were still not satisfied, but the Association of Catholic Colleges, the Catholic Social Services, Association of Catholic Hospitals were satisfied with it. But my point is that it was picked up as a political issue. It's being debated kind of one-sidedly by the Republican candidates for president, and the Republicans are introducing bills in Congress to try to change. It's not going to get anywhere, but they do it anyhow. And it's certainly appropriate for candidates for public office to seek the support of religious groups on the ground that I support your principles. Well, you're certainly seeing this right now in the Republican presidential primary. Surveys identify voting patterns by religion, and they are very interesting to look at. White Protestants overwhelmingly vote Republican. I say white Protestants to distinguish them from African American Protestants who, like other African Americans, vote overwhelmingly Democratic. And the tendency to vote Republican is even stronger among evangelicals. The Catholic vote's divided. It trends to one party or another at different points in time. President Obama carried the Catholic vote by about 10 points in the 2008 election. The Jewish vote, which I'm familiar with as being Jewish, is overwhelmingly Democratic. What I want to talk about is how religion and politics translates into a policy of unwavering support for Israel. Whatever other considerations may be there get put aside because of domestic political considerations. One of the things that I did in this paper is I had our librarians collect an awful lot of data that I put in the footnotes in the article, which says something about the different religious ethnic groups in the United States. American Jews, virtually across the board, are strong supporters of Israel and of Israel's right to exist as a Jewish state in the Middle East. They take a strong interest in what I've called my other speeches the Arab-Israeli conflict. There are divisions among them, just as there are divisions among Israelis. But again, I've noticed, the divisions depend on what is in Israel's best interest. Those American Jews who favor a two-state solution don't argue that we should recognize the rights of the Palestinians. They say that Israel cannot exist as a democratic Jewish state as long as it controls and occupies the West Bank and the 1.5 million Palestinians living there. Now, American Jews are, as I say, virtually or strong supporters of Israel. Then presidential candidates, senators, members of Congress seeking the Jewish vote are highly motivated to take actions that will be seen by American Jews as supportive of Israel. American Jews are also very heavily involved in the Democratic Party and in fundraising. One of the things about stereotypes is that they tend to be accurate. They're overblown, but they're accurate at the core. You hear about Jewish money in Hollywood. It's absolutely true. A number of studios are owned, we have Jewish studio owners, Jewish producers, and when the Democrats raise enormous money out of Hollywood, as they do, a lot of it comes from Jewish donors. Jews are important politically because in some large states, Michigan's an exception, they're an identifiable percentage of the population going from 3 to 8% in states like New York, Massachusetts, California, and so forth. So the Jewish vote is very important. Now, Republican candidates, Republicans hoping to make inroads into the Jewish vote, try to out-Israel their Democratic opponents. In every election, you'll see Republicans taking out ads in publications like the Jewish News that the Republican candidate is more pro-Israel than the Democratic candidate. Okay, now, evangelical Christians, Washington, they're very prominent in the Republican primary. They vote overwhelmingly Republican. They're also strong supporters of Israel, and for many of them, this support is based on a specific religious reason. It is part of fundamentalist Christian doctrine that Jews must control the Holy Land so that they can be converted to Christianity, and when they are converted to Christianity, there will be the second coming of Christ. A number of evangelicals believe that, and even those who don't necessarily subscribe to second coming believe that God has a covenant with the Jewish people and with Israel, so that Christians have a religious mandate to, quote, honor and cherish the Jewish people. And when you see Republican candidates speaking at evangelical Christian conventions or other Christian religious conservatives, they will always emphasize their strong support for Israel. And Republican candidates will avoid any talk of a two-state solution. They emphasize Israel's security needs, the problem of, quote, Arab terrorism. I think it's also fair to say that with respect to the Arab-Israeli conflict, the overwhelming numbers of Americans of all religious stripes come down on the side of Israel and want the American government to be strong in its support of Israel. I mean, even prior to 9/11, there was a negative image of Arabs in the United States. I'm trying to distinguish Arabs from Arab Americans because, for the most part, this has not carried over. Now, we are seeing in some places, Detroit is not one of them, but we are seeing in some places anti-Muslim filling surface. This happened with respect to locating a mosque at Ground Zero. It happened in some places like Murfreesboro, Tennessee, where there was a question of having a mosque. Peter King, who was the chair of the Homeland Security Committee, has scheduled thus far at least 2 hearings on what he calls Muslim radicalization. We see state legislative efforts directed at the non-issue of prohibiting the use of Islamic law in American courts. So all of this is very unfortunately reflective of an anti-Muslim feeling, which just feeds into an anti-Arab feeling. One may note that what's happening in the Arab world doesn't help much any. If you look at what's happening in Syria, where the Syrian government is killing its own people. We've seen the violence in Egypt, in Yemen, in Libya, and all these things. This does not help the image, if you will, of the Arab people, and it spills over to the Palestinians. And you don't see any counterweight to this. I mean, of course, Arab Americans do not have a great deal of political influence in the United States, but for the most part, Arab American organizations have focused on the interests and needs of Arab Americans. And they've not been using limited political capital in trying to bring about a more balanced approach to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict on the part of the American government. So what this means is that American foreign policy in the Middle East is a policy of unwavering support for Israel. You know, the United States has vetoed virtually every resolution in the Security Council that was expressively or impliedly critical of Israel. I think last year they vetoed a resolution that called for a halt to settlement building in the West Bank. Well, the United States is opposed to increased settlement building in the West Bank, but it's okay for the United States to say so. It's not okay for the Security Council to say so. So the United States vetoed the resolution. You saw the efforts of the Palestinian Authority to get recognition of a Palestinian state in the United Nations were basically thwarted by the United States. And if it had come to a vote in the Security Council, which is a condition for UN membership, the United States would have vetoed it. You saw what happened when UNESCO admitted the state of Palestine to membership. In accordance with American law, American funding to UNESCO was cut off. Well, it's been contended by a number of commentators, time after time, that the unwavering support for Israel in the United States contributes to anti-American in Arab and Muslim countries. Well, perhaps this may be so. It may also be observed that anti-Americanism also results from American support until very recently, and still to a large extent from traditional and oppressive ruling elites in Arab and Muslim countries. But this doesn't matter. The domestic political considerations control, and they mandate unwavering support for Israel, regardless of any, quote, anti-Americanism it may produce in the Arab and Muslim world. Then I go on to what I call the relationship between the government of the United States and the government of Israel. It is a very symbiotic relationship, controlled, if by nothing else, by political considerations on both sides. As you can see, I put a lot of emphasis on political considerations in influencing American foreign policy in the Middle East, because they clearly do. Israel is heavily dependent on the United States for military assistance and for support in the United Nations and in the international arena. It also relies, apart from American aid, on very significant financial support provided by American Jews. This means that the Israeli public expects the government of Israel to maintain very good relations with the United States, and expects the Israeli Prime Minister to avoid doing anything that would antagonize the American president so much that the American president would say, we wash our hands of Israel, we can't deal with them, we're not going to cooperate with them anymore. The Israelis would not want the American president ever to say that. By the same token, the American president doesn't want to say that. The domestic political considerations that we have discussed before demand that the United States maintain very good relations with Israel and be steadfast in its support of Israel. So these considerations constrain the American president in his dealings with the Prime Minister of Israel. And the American president can't be so frustrated or antagonized by the Israeli Prime Minister that the president would announce a break with Israel. What does that mean? Well, it means that on the one hand, the relationship is very cooperative. But it also means that sometimes it takes the form of push, push back, push again, push back. Both parties are careful not to miscalculate how much pressure and resistance they can put on each other, and they both must take into account the political realities the other faces. When I did the paper, it was last summer, I talked mostly about the peace process, and I will talk about that again. But the matter has also surfaced recently when it comes to bombing Iran and trying to prevent Iran from developing a nuclear weapon. There was a story in the New York Times recently. I used to say to my students, as you've read in the newspapers, I realize that this generation of young people doesn't read the newspapers, so I've said, as you may have seen in the news, questions are raised as to whether Israel really has the military capacity to bomb the nuclear sites in Iran. It's a problem of refueling and so forth. Then you have sort of ratcheting up pressure, where the Israeli Prime Minister or various Israeli officials say, we can't let Iran get the atomic bomb, never ruling out military action by itself. President Bush, although he at first denied it, toward the end of his term, gave Israel the Buster bombs. Again, we don't know how effective they're going to be, but Israel has the Buster bombs, which may be able to destroy the nuclear facilities. And you get speculation in the media that if Israel feels pressured enough, it will do it on its own. That's not going to happen. For something that has these kind of repercussions in the Middle East, Israel and the United States will, quote, work together. Right now, the United States doesn't want, quote, Israel to bomb Iran. Israel would like to bomb Iran, and it's not alone. Saudi Arabia and the Gulf states would also like to see Israel bomb Iran. The Shiite-Sunni conflict in the Arab world is the subject of a paper itself, and I don't have a great deal of expertise in that area, nor purport to do so. But you can be sure if a decision is made that Israel is going to try to bomb the nuclear sites in Iran, it will be a decision that will have been discussed with the United States. And even though the American president would not say publicly, the tacit approval will have been given, with an understanding that if a backup is necessary, the United States will provide it. The main thesis of my paper, and I want to leave ample time for questions, relates to the Jews, the Democratic Party, and President Obama. President Obama got a 78% of the Jewish vote the last time, according to the exit surveys. Jews have disproportionate influence in Congress, as they do in many other areas of American life. Jews make up maybe 1.5% of the population, about 5.1 million people in a population of 310. But there are 12 Jewish senators, all of whom are Democrats. So 12% of the senators are Jewish, they're all Democrats. There are 26 Jewish members of the House, close to about 7%, and all except Eric Cantor, the Republican majority leader, are Democrats. In addition, all the heads of major Jewish organizations, including conservative ones like AIPAC, are Democrats, which means that they are not going to publicly attack President Obama over what he does in the Middle East. Last May, Prime Minister Netanyahu came to the United States on a visit. Speaker Boehner arranged for him to get a joint, to get an invitation to address a joint session of Congress, which is virtually unheard of. Right before that happened, Obama gave a speech at the State Department, toward the end of which he said, the starting point for Israeli-Palestinian negotiations must be the 1967 borders agreed with land swaps. The Netanyahu government did not want the president to say that. There was an angry call to Secretary of State Clinton in an effort to get this deleted. Obama said it anyhow. And then Obama explained, when he gave a speech to AIPAC, the American-Israel Public Affairs Committee, a very, quote, conservative type organization, he explained that he said, with mutually agreed upon land swaps. See, there are 4 major settlements in the West Bank. 3 of them are close to Jerusalem, and they could easily be incorporated into Israel. The 4th is pretty deep in the West Bank. That would be a lot more difficult. In any event, Obama made clear that he was talking about mutually agreed upon land swaps. Well, when Netanyahu came to address Congress, he ignored mutually agreeable land swaps. He said, we cannot return to the 1967 borders. They are indefensible. And everybody applauded. I mean, everybody got up to show their support for Israel. The New York Times observed that he got so many standing ovations that when he gave the speech, Congress should have been probably standing up. But again, I think this shows what domestic policies are. I think if Obama is if a Republican president is reelected, you're not going to see any movement, any real movement toward trying to bring about a peace settlement. Nobody wants it in that sense. I'm convinced that Netanyahu doesn't want it. This is an interesting historical point. When the United Nations voted on the partition of Palestine in 1947, it was said, well, the Jews accepted it, the Arab states didn't. Well, that's not entirely true. There was a wing of the Zionist movement called the Jabotinsky wing, after its founder, that says, we don't accept this. There is a Palestinian state. It's called Jordan. And a great deal of Britain's Palestinian mandate was given to Jordan, to Transjordan and made the Kingdom of Jordan. So the Jews should get all of Palestine. But the majority Zionist view was that the Jews should accept the partition, which led to the state of Israel. But Likud is the ideological successor of the Jabotinsky wing of Zionism. And if you notice, Netanyahu refers to the West Bank by the biblical names Judea and Samaria. Plus, the settlers are part of his coalition. So he doesn't want to have the political problem of having to agree to a settlement. He's not going to say that. Publicly, he's going to say, I support a two-state solution, but he doesn't really, if I'm right. By the same token, Mohammed Abbas, the head of the Palestinian Authority, has his own problems. One, he has Hamas that controls Gaza. Two, while the Palestinians living in the West Bank obviously accept the existence of Israel, it's a reality that cannot be ignored. It's one thing to accept it, it's another thing to formalize it, so to speak. Also, the Palestinian Authority is not going to get very much in a settlement, at least in terms of demands it made. It would get the end of the Israeli occupation, which I would note is a problem only for Palestinians living close to the Israeli settlements. For the largest number of Palestinians who live in the areas fully controlled by the Palestinian Authority, the Israeli occupation is no problem at all. And Palestine is doing pretty well economically these days. The violence has come to an end. It's able to trade with Israel. It's able to export its goods. So the Palestinians are doing pretty well. Again, so there's less pressure on us. Obviously, there's going to be no right of return to Israel. I mean, that no Israeli government could allow that. What there would be is substantial American and international aid from the Arab countries to enable the Palestinians in the diaspora to settle in the West Bank. Israel would not give up control of Jerusalem. I mean, the most it could do would give an enclave, sort of like the Vatican, for a capital of the Palestinian state. So in a sense, the demands that the Palestinians have been making are not going to be realized in the best offer. My theory is that Obama, if he's elected in his second term, is freed from domestic political considerations personally. He can step out a bit, knowing that he will get the support, at least publicly, of all the Jewish Democrats in Congress, and he's not going to be attacked by the heads of the major Jewish organizations who are also Democrats. So my view is he can push Netanyahu a little harder than he can push him right now. Clearly he's not going to do anything until after the election. So if there's any hope for a two-state solution that would give a state to the Palestinians. And again, I don't know what you would do about Gaza, but if there's any hope for that, it is because President Obama, based on domestic political considerations, is in a position to push for that settlement. Not a very optimistic view, not a very positive view, but I think it's a very realistic one. I've talked for a good deal, and this is supposed to be, and we want this to be interactive, so I think it's now time for your questions and comments. Marvin.
Bob, as always, there's a lot of food for thought here. I've got like 6 items here, but let me just stick to one. The thesis is that it's the larger political thesis is that people who are in the position in an unexpected political position can bring about political change. I'm thinking of de Gaulle getting France out of only a military nationalist, who's the shining light, could have done it. A liberal French government could not have gotten a French. I think there may be other examples. So it's an interesting kind of a thesis that that a party that would be aligned, more or less aligned with Israel. There are some complicating factors, as you pointed out, that both parties, for different reasons, are aligned in different ways. But what I'm interested in is the Republican support of Israel seems to reflect a constant theme, sort of a sub-theme in American politics of sort of almost an apocalyptic turn. From the know-nothings to the sort of anti-red, to the McCarthy era that we both remember from our younger days, to the kind of extreme hype about Muslims that are bizarre. But we always see these things in American politics, and it seems to me that as the Republican Party has become a highly conservative part of what used to be a broader party, that it's when it comes to this specific issue, there are others as well, it's pandering to sort of bizarre and irrational fears that nevertheless put it in kind of a truculent position. And if even if the Democrats control both the House and the Senate after the next election, I'm not sure that they'll have, they're not going to have overwhelming control. So I'm not sure that Obama's going to be in a position of saying there's another side that would go. It just that he doesn't seem to me that he's got clear maneuvering room, even if he doesn't have to worry about his own political capital after the next election.
Congress can't restrain him. I mean, when it comes to this part of foreign policy, the president has the power. He's not engaged. He's not coming in any treaties. Monetary
support. There's got to have to be money behind any kind of stuff.
I think that's an interesting point. We are already giving aid to Israel. We are already giving money to the Palestinian Authority. See, my idea is that the president could bring Netanyahu, who I think is going to be in power in Israel indefinitely, thanks to Yasser Arafat and the suicide bombers. I think Netanyahu and the Likud coalition has a pretty clear path. They've co-opted the Labor's strongest candidate, Ehud Barak, who was their Minister of Defense, and
who seems to be more hawkish by the latest things I read.
He's being the minister
on bombing Iran.
He's being the Minister of Defense. We often don't understand the difference between the questions, Marvin, are always many. We got many responses. We don't understand. We often don't understand the difference between a parliamentary system and our presidential system. where all the members of the cabinet are appointed by the president. In a parliamentary system, members of the cabinet, really members of the ministries, really have control over the issues of their ministries. And so the prime minister is set first among equals, but the prime minister is going to give some deference to the minister of defense on military and defense issues. But as for so I think that Obama has the power as president to try to bring Netanyahu and Abbas together to sort of pressure both of them to enter into an agreement. I think there's no doubt that an agreement would be approved by the Israeli public. In a parliamentary system, sometimes a coalition government doesn't have broad support on particular issues. So this is what I see as the possibility. I don't see even the Republicans coming out against a two-state solution, because nominally Netanyahu and Likud favor a two-state solution. Nominally, so do the Republicans. They just put so many conditions on. I mean, you're right about a change in the Republican Party. Now, I give stock speeches. By that I mean, I speak to a lot of groups, especially senior groups. These are my people, of course, but other groups as well. And I keep recycling the same thing, adapting. I got a lot of, I gave a speech on this already this week. I have another one scheduled. But my other main topic for this year is our 18th century Constitution, the President, Congress, and our two-party system. And you're quite right. Our two-party system has changed, to some extent at least. It was more traditionally a two-party system with the Republicans being center-right and the Democrats being center-left. Our constitutional system is based on compromise. The framers were not troubled by gridlock. They feared Congress. So they insisted that both houses agree on legislation and that the president agree. Well, you saw what happened overextending the debt limit, where the Republicans had an advantage because the president didn't know whether they would agree in the end, because they just might have let the United States default. So the president had to give in to them on extending the debt ceiling. But when it came to extending the Social Security payroll tax and unemployment benefits without offsetting money, the Republicans wanted to cut programs. The president wanted to raise a millionaire's tax. The Republicans had to yield, with the result that the extensions were made without any offset income changes in revenue. So that's how our system works. And having said that, there's been a change in the Republican Party, whether it's the influence of the Tea Party, whether it's more red and blue states, whatever it is. You can see in the House the difficulty of Speaker Boehner in getting a Republican consensus. And if he doesn't have Republican consensus, he's reluctant to bring the matter to a vote. So this gridlock that the framers fully anticipated and thought was a good idea, unless you had consensus, is going to continue. You're not going to have any major policy initiatives in Congress until after the election. But going back to the specific point that you made, I don't think that Congress will constrain the president in his efforts to bring the Netanyahu government and Abbas's Palestinian Authority together. I think there's going to be a problem in doing it. My only point is he can push a little harder on Netanyahu because he will have the support of the Jewish members of Congress and the Jewish organizations and the like. That's my thesis, not a very profound one. Yes?
I got a question for you. How has the increasing radicalization of Christianity and Christian sects in the U.S. affected politics and policies towards the Middle East? I mean, you know, you got increasing proportions of Christianity coming from fundamental Baptists, Pentecostals, independent Baptists.
Evangelical Christians, let me just call it fundamentalists. As I said, I think that academic types, students, faculty, and the like, often have some difficulty in understanding fundamentalist religion. I think a lot of people are more liberal in their views or more secular and don't understand how intensely fundamentalist people, whether you're talking about evangelical Christians, highly observant Catholics, Orthodox Jews, feel about their religion, where it permeates their entire lives. And it's going to permeate their voting behavior. It's shown, for example, that white Protestants who attend church regularly are more likely to vote Republican than other white Protestants. So I think this says something. I think this is sort of brings out, reinforces what you were saying, and this is the base of the Republican Party. It's a very important base, and in the primaries, the candidates are appealing to this base. Now, it would seem to an objective observer that they're going pretty far to the religious right, so to speak, and you ask, how do they go back to the center for the presidential election? My thought, and I'm a partisan Democrat, but I try to be an objective observer, my thought is I'm trying to get into Romney's mind and Romney's strategy. Because remember that the election started out, it's the economy. And the Republicans were going to run on a ticket that we will fix the economy, and Obama hasn't. But in order to get the nomination, the Republican candidate has to get the support of fundamentalist Christians, of evangelicals, and so forth. And I would think the Romney thinks, I'll do this in the campaign, I'll get the nomination, and then when I run on my campaign, I will talk only about economic issues and not about social issues. Now, I suspect that the Democratic PACs will be reminding the voters about Romney's positions on social issues. But I suspect that's his strategy.
So theoretically speaking, as you see more of the U.S. population coming from these fundamentalists, would we get farther and farther away from the two-state solution?
Oh, on this issue, I don't think the Republicans have any incentive. If both parties were to play it straight politically, they wouldn't touch this. They would just say, we are strong supporters of Israel. It seems the Democratic presidents, first Clinton and now Obama, want to do something about it. But politically, both parties would be better off not touching it. Because you know, this goes back, Marvin, to your point. When Obama starts, if Obama starts trying to push Netanyahu and Abbas together, you're going to find the Republican senators criticizing him. For example, when he made the statement that he thought was not, that we started with the 1967 borders with mutually agreed land swaps, all the Republican candidates attacked him. Romney said he's shoved Israel under a bus. And so you can see that when Obama starts doing this, he's going to run the risk of attack from Republicans in Congress. Now that's where it's going to come. They can't block him, they can't do anything, but they certainly can attack him politically as being, quote, soft on Israel. And that has been the standard Republican mantra for the Democratic candidate is soft on Israel. They thought they were going to make some big inroads in 1970 and in 2008 because Obama, had these Muslim ties, so to speak. They were hoping to get among older Jews who are strong, who are very intense on Israel, with memories of the Holocaust and the founding of the State of Israel. They may have made some inroads among older Jews, but it was offset by the fact that younger Jews were voting for the first time and they voted Democratic. So that's what I think is going to happen. Again, if Obama is reelected, and I do think he will try to push it.
Michael? What about the complicating factor of Egypt? I mean, if the Muslim Brotherhood looks like they're coming to power, and it looks like they're uncomfortable with the treaty with Israel, then how might that play out? Do you have any ideas on that?
Well, again, Egypt. Egypt has been our second most important ally in the Middle East. We have relied on Egypt as our major Arab ally. The American government, American presidents were very happy with Mubarak. He kept down the Muslim Brotherhood. He maintained a strong peace with Israel. The military was in power. Then we reacted slowly to the Arab Spring in Egypt. But finally, we got on, one might say, the right side of history. Now, are you talking about the old Muslim Brotherhood when it was in opposition, or the new Muslim Brotherhood when it is the governing party? It assured the United States that it will adhere to all of its treaty obligations. If Egypt ever abrogated the treaty with Egypt, the $1.5 billion a year in military aid and the other aid would disappear immediately, and they all know that. Now this has been complicated by the arrest of these and prosecution of Americans voting, operating for the nonprofits. And we know how it's going to end. It's going to end with their leaving Egypt. I strongly suspect that they will be found guilty of violating the Egyptian laws, because this was the law, part of the Mubarak, during the Mubarak era, and the military really do believe that outside influences taken an effect in Egypt. So, but I think, again, that's the answer. And the military has promised to respect the treaties. It's not in Egypt's interest to abrogate its treaty with Israel.
I don't know what. We used to have a CIA that would take care of problems in places like Iran. Maybe they don't have any.
It's a long time.
Not competent anymore, but how is Obama connected to the Jewish community? And there's just like a web of influence when you speak about Jewish influence in American politics. Lloyd Blankfein, Goldman Sachs. How much are they paying attention to the dollar? Is it just sort of votes, or is it money?
Can I add a codicil to that question? Something that really bothered me. This guy Adelson is one Jew who's giving how many millions of dollars
So
to
far,
Newt
10.
Gingrich?
So far, 10.
10 million, because he believes that Gingrich is the only Republican who really would bomb Iran. And as an American Jew with relatives in Israel who's conflicted over this issue, although I think I'm leaning more towards if Iran gets the bomb, I don't think the world's going to come to an end. But this guy's got $10 million of influence, and what do I give, 100 or 200 bucks a year? So that's the influence of money also, which is your question, really. And
Well, you look at Ben Bernanke,
Influence,
it's
but-
all about the balance sheets of the too big to fail banks. I mean, is Goldman Sachs calling the shots in this country?
I'm not so
I
sure.
don't think anybody is calling.
that Jewish.
I don't think anybody is calling the shots. But what I've tried to explain is that this unvarying support for Israel has broad public support. whether we're talking about Jewish Americans, whether we're talking about evangelical Christians, whether we're talking about the public. Where do you see any sign in the American public that any group cares about the Palestinians?
It's
I
only
agree
among
fully with
academics.
you.
Pardon? It's only among academics.
No, it is.
In some cases, nobody cares about the Palestinians.
You know, with a guy like Noam Chomsky, is he just like shouting in the wilderness? Nobody's
so
Yeah, he's
far
an
out.
academic.
Doesn't exactly have a following, doesn't exactly have, no, there's not one political
Sociology
leader.
departments, he's big in sociology.
There's not one political leader who has ever talked about a more balanced policy. Let me use two local examples, whom I both know. John Dingell, who represents a district with a substantial Arab American population and virtually no Jews. John Conyers, who before the redistricting represented a district with virtually no Jews. That's changed after redistricting. Why wouldn't they at least speak out for the, quote, Palestinians? Because as Democrats and fundraisers for Democratic candidates, they did not want to antagonize Jewish Americans who are major contributors to Democratic candidates. So these are the answers, because I happen to think that the matter of the influence of money is overstated. But the influence of voting is not. Perhaps one of the, what is the most influential American group that doesn't spend any money on lobbying? Answer, art, because they represent old people. I point out to my students that if poor people would vote as with the regularity of old people, the government would fall over itself in effort of programs to help poor people. So it's not simply money, it's the ability to turn out a vote. And this is why Congress is very sensitive about doing things that might interfere with the benefits of old people. The Tea Party folk are very good at this. Cut all government spending except for Social Security and Medicare, which older people get, and their rationale is that we've paid into Social Security and Medicare. This really isn't a government benefit.
Just one last question. Jews really gonna move over to the Republican Party?
No.
Then it's not the Jewish vote per se that matters, it's Jewish money.
No.
Well, no, it's
Can I try to put a finer point on this? I think we're pushing the limits of time here. Look, as a Jew, as a Zionist, as a person with relatives there, but as a liberal, you know, there's a whole cluster of issues here about the nature of the Jewish state. I mean, the people I fear the most in the world are ultra-Orthodox rabbis in Israel, in terms of really messing up something that is valuable to me and my relatives, most of my relatives. I think there was, at least 10 years ago, a much stronger liberal position, both in the US and Israel, about an accommodated solution, two-state with more generous help. And I think even in Israel, the left has quieted down, because while there's been some really positive moves on the Palestinian side, you know, the prime minister who's created a pretty viable state, there's also been negatives. And what appears, from my perspective, to be an intransigent Hamas, although you never can tell, things change over time. Real fear from Hezbollah getting Iranian arms through Syria. And that's a whole big question. I don't think anything's going to happen until that settles out. And I think that's going to be beyond the Obama administration. But to get back to US domestic politics, when reasonable approaches to creating a two-state solution are raised, what that produces within the Jewish community, the democratic Jewish community, is a push towards the right, where they start going to that kind of fear politics, and they start talking about force and bombs, and it doesn't allow the kind of fears that would be raised not only by Republicans but by many Jewish groups like AIPAC, would make it difficult for the kind of solution that Clinton was trying to get at the end of his administration.
See, my view is that, I use AIPAC as an example. The president of AIPAC is a Democrat.
Yeah, but what kind of,
Well, it doesn't,
when it comes to this issue?
I think that on this issue, again, you're not gonna have an all-out attack on Obama that's doing this. You're quite right. You're gonna have attacks about specifics. And again, we can only wait and see if Obama is reelected. I think if he is reelected, he will make this push. And as you point out, there's going to be a lot of resistance, because if I'm right, the Netanyahu government doesn't want it, and certainly fundamentalists don't want it. And as you say, within the Jewish community, there's far from unanimity on the issue. Plus, it's not an important issue to most Americans who could really care less whether there is a Palestinian state. I'm just going to end on one point about religion, and in this case, bombing Iran. One of the people at the round table was now a political science professor at the Air Force Academy, who had spent his career in military intelligence and did a lot of work with the Israeli government. You would say, well, even if Iran has a bomb, how can it be a threat to Israel? Because if Iran were to ever launch a nuclear attack on Israel, Israel has the nuclear weapons to destroy Iran many times over. Okay, this is where religion comes in. It is a part of Shiite theology that if there is an apocalypse type thing in the world, the 12th Imam, the Mahdi, will come back. This is a missing Mahdi. I don't understand. A missing Imam. I don't fully understand what this is. But if there's a 1,000,000 to 1 chance that a leader would come to power in Iran who believes in this, what better way to bring in the coming of the 12th Imam to launch a nuclear attack on Israel? This is not far-fetched. This is very much in the mind of Israeli planners, which they will, if you say, well, Iran would never launch a nuclear weapon on Israel, they would say, what about the 12th Imam? On that cheerful point, I think we're going to end.
Bob, I'm reading The Cold War by John Gaddis.
By who?
John Gaddis. Gaddis, The Cold War.